We're counting down the 15 forgotten hunting knives every American man once carried into the woods. Blades that field-dressed whitetails by lantern light, rode in the pockets of returning GIS, and passed from grandfather to grandson at deer camp before vanishing from hardware store shelves. From mountain men's trade knives to the folding hunter that ruled the 1960s, each one tells a story of craftsmanship, thrift, and the woods themselves. Expect carbon steel that took an edge like a razor, knives that cost $1 and lasted a lifetime, and names your grandfather spoke with quiet reverence. Which legend tops our list? Let's begin the countdown with number 15. Number 15, the old Hickory butcher knife crossed over from the farm kitchen to the deer woods the way nothing fancy ever could. Made by the Ontario Knife Company in upstate New York, these plain carbon steel blades with their riveted hardwood handles were never marketed as hunting knives at all. They lived in the kitchen drawer, sold for around 50 cents in the 1930s, and got pressed into service the moment a man needed to dress a deer or skin a hog. The steel was soft enough to sharpen on the bottom of a coffee mug and hard enough to hold a working edge through an afternoon. Farmers carried them in the truck, wrapped in an oil rag, knowing that a knife costing pennies could do the same job as one costing $5. The blade would patina to a dull gray, the handle would darken with use, and nobody worried about babying it. Oral histories from the rural Midwest recall the old Hickory as the knife that did everything, butchering hogs in November, slicing apples in September, and gutting a buck before sunrise. Yet as stainless steel and molded handles took over hardware aisles, the humble carbon steel butcher knife slipped out of the woods and back into the kitchen, then off the shelves entirely. Today it survives mostly in old toolboxes and the memory of men who learned that the cheapest knife in the house was often the most useful. Number 14. The Barlow knife rode in more American pockets than any blade before or since. The first knife a boy was ever handed, and the last one a working man set down. Born in England but made famous in America, the Barlow was the cheap, sturdy jackknife with a long bolster and a clip blade, sold for as little as a dime through the Sears Roebuck catalog. By the early 1900s, nearly every farm boy in the country owned one, traded for one, or whittled with one on the schoolhouse steps. It was the knife Tom Sawyer carried, the knife a grandfather pressed into a grandson's hand with the words, "Don't cut toward yourself." In the deer woods, it dressed small game, cut twine, trimmed a fresh blister, and pried a stone from a boot heel. The blade was carbon steel, easy to sharpen, easy to lose, easy to replace. Diaries from rural America recall boys earning their first Barlow through a season of chores, then carrying it until the blade was honed down to a sliver. Yet the Barlow's very cheapness was its undoing. As stamped stainless multi-tools and disposable utility knives filled the registers, the honest single-blade jackknife became a relic. Today, the Barlow survives mostly among collectors and old men, its memory tied to a time when a boy's whole world fit in his front pocket. Number 13. The Western Cutlery sheath knife came down out of the Colorado Rockies with the smell of pine and gun oil baked into its leather. Made by Western States Cutlery in Boulder, these full-tang fixed blades with stacked leather handles and bright steel guards were the working hunter's companion across the Mountain West. In the 1950s, a Western sheath knife sold for around $3, affordable enough for a ranch hand and tough enough for an elk camp at 10,000 feet. The leather washer handle warmed in the hand and never got slick with blood, and the heavy clip-point blade could quarter a mule deer as easily as it could split kindling. Hunters wore them on the belt in a thick leather sheath, the knife slapping against the hip on the long walk in. Oral histories from the Rockies recall Western knives handed out as high school graduation gifts, carried into the Army, and brought back home to hang by the door. The company stamped each blade with a date code so a man could read the year his father bought his. Yet as foreign imports undercut American cutlery and the Boulder factory eventually closed its doors, the Western sheath knife faded from the sporting goods racks. Today it survives in tackle boxes in the back of gun safes, its leather darkened, its blade still sharp, a quiet monument to the days when the West made its own steel. Number 12. The Cattaraugus 225Q went to war before it went to the woods, and it never quite lost the smell of gunpowder. Made in Little Valley, New York, the 225Q was built as a heavy-duty quartermaster's knife during the Second World War, its blade thick enough to pry open ammunition crates and tough enough to survive the Pacific. The Q stood for quartermaster, and the design was rugged beyond reason. A 6-inch clip point blade, a red fiber and leather handle, and a pommel a soldier could use as a hammer. When the boys came home in 1945, those knives came with them, stuffed in duffel bags and pressed into peacetime service. A war surplus 225Q could be had for $1 or $2, and across deer camps from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin, it became the knife that dressed the family's venison. The blade was almost too much knife for a whitetail, but a generation raised on scarcity never threw away anything that worked. Oral histories from veterans recall the 225Q as a trusted companion, a blade that had seen Guadalcanal and now saw nothing fiercer than a frosty November morning. Yet as the war generation aged and slimmer purpose-built hunting knives took over, the heavy quartermaster's blade slipped into the drawer. Today, the Cattaraugus 225Q survives mostly in collections and shadow boxes, a knife that carried two histories, one of war and one of the woods, in a single piece of American steel. Number 11. Kinfolks knives carried a name that said everything about how they were meant to be used, passed down, shared, kept in the family. Made in Little Valley, New York, by craftsmen who had learned their trade in the great cutlery towns of the Northeast, Kinfolks produced sturdy, fixed-blade hunting knives through the middle of the century, sold for a few dollars in hardware stores and sporting goods shops across the country. The blades were honest carbon steel, the handles were stacked leather or stag, and the whole knife was built to be used hard and handed on. A father bought one for himself and a smaller one for his son, and the two went into the woods together, the boy learning to dress his first squirrel under his father's eye. Oral histories from the Northeast recall the pride of owning a Kinfolks, a knife that felt like it belonged to a lineage rather than a season. The company even supplied blades during the war, then returned to the sporting trade when peace came. Yet Kinfolks could not survive the long decline of American cutlery. As the Little Valley factories closed one by one and cheaper imports flooded the market, the name disappeared from the shelves almost without notice. Today, Kinfolks knives turn up at estate sales and flea markets, their leather handles worn smooth by hands long gone, the name still promising something the modern market forgot, that a knife could be kin. Number 10. The Schrade Sharpfinger was the strange-looking little skinner that landed in nearly every deer hunter's hand in the 1970s. Introduced in 1973 by Schrade Cutlery, the Sharpfinger had an unmistakable upswept blade with a deep clip and a sharply hooked point, a shape designed for one job above all, sliding under the hide of a whitetail without nicking the meat. It sold for around $10, came in a snap strap leather sheath, and quickly became the most recognizable hunting knife in America. Sporting goods stores stacked them by the hundreds every autumn, and a generation of hunters learned to field dress and skin with that funny little hooked blade. The handle was molded Delrin, tough and weatherproof, stamped old-timer with the familiar shield. Oral histories from deer camps across the country recall the Sharpfinger as the first real hunting knife a young man bought with his own money. It was light on the belt, easy to control, and good enough that a careful hunter never needed another. Yet as Schrade's American factory closed in 2004 and production moved overseas, the original Sharpfinger became a thing of the past. The imports that bore the name never quite matched the steel or the feel of the originals. Today, a genuine USA-made Sharpfinger is a prize at flea markets, its odd hooked blade a reminder of the autumn when nearly every truck in the parking lot had one riding on the dash. Number 9. The Remington Bullet knife was the folding hunter that turned a gun company's logo into a collector's grail. In the 1920s, the Remington Arms Company, famous for its ammunition, began producing pocket knives stamped with a shield shaped like a cartridge, and the largest of these heavy folding hunters earned the name the Bullet knife. The blade locked open with authority, the bone handle filled the hand, and the cartridge shield gleamed against the dark jigged bone. In its day, it sold for $1 or $2, a serious knife for a serious hunter, the kind a man saved for and then carried for 30 years. The bullet folded down small enough for a coat pocket, yet opened into a blade long enough to dress any deer in the country. Oral histories from the period recall the pride of owning a Remington, a knife that married the romance of the gun with the practicality of the blade. Yet Remington stopped making the original bullet knives in 1940, as the company turned fully toward the war effort, and the folding hunter with the cartridge shield vanished almost overnight. For decades afterward, those pre-war bullets passed quietly between fathers and sons. Today, the original Remington Bullet knife is among the most sought-after American folders ever made, its memory tied to a time when the same name on a man's rifle could be found faithfully on the knife in his pocket. Number 8. The Marble's Woodcraft was the knife the wilderness guides reached for when a job had to be done right. Introduced in 1916 by the Marble Arms Company of Gladstone, Michigan, the Woodcraft refined the American hunting knife into something close to perfect, a wide, deep-bellied clip-point blade ground for skinning, with a stacked leather handle and an aluminum pommel. It was the knife of the Northwoods guide, the trapper, the canoe country hunter who needed one blade to do everything from caping a buck to splitting a grouse. In the early decades of the century, a Woodcraft sold for around $2, and it earned that price every season. The broad belly of the blade made it a natural skinner, peeling hide from a deer in long, clean strokes, while the point stayed fine enough for delicate work. Oral histories from the Great Lakes guides recall the Woodcraft as the professional's choice, a knife that looked like it meant business and never let a man down. Marbles stamped its name on the blade with pride, and that name meant quality across the hunting world. Yet as the old Michigan factory changed hands and cheaper knives flooded the market, the Woodcraft slipped from production and from memory. Today, an original Marbles Woodcraft is a treasure among collectors. Its deep-bellied blade a reminder of the era when American knife makers built tools for men who lived by them. Number 7. The Russell Green River knife rode west with the mountain men and carved the early American frontier into being. Made by John Russell's Green River Works in Massachusetts, beginning in the 1830s, these simple, thin-bladed carbon steel knives became the standard tool of the fur trade, shipped by the thousands to the rendezvous camps of the Rocky Mountains. A trapper could buy one for a few cents, and with it, he skinned beaver, butchered buffalo, ate his supper, and defended his life. The blades were so good and so common that the phrase "up to Green River" entered the language, meaning to do a thing completely, all the way to the maker's mark stamped near the handle. The mountain men carried them in beaded sheaths, the plains tribes traded furs for them, and the whole opening of the West passed through their edges. Oral histories and trapper journals recall the Green River as the knife that did everything a frontiersman asked. The steel was plain and the design was humble, but it was reliable in a country where a dull or broken knife could cost a man his life. Yet as the fur trade collapsed and the frontier closed, the Green River faded from daily use, surviving mostly among buckskinners and reenactors who keep the old skills alive. Today it stands as perhaps the most historically important hunting knife America ever produced, a plain blade that helped a young nation reach the Pacific. Number 6. The Case XX hunting knife carried the warmth of a family company into 3 generations of deer camps. Made by W.R. Case and Sons of Bradford, Pennsylvania, Case knives were famous for their bone and stag handles, their long pull blades, and the double X stamp that promised double-tempered steel. Through the middle of the century, a case-fixed blade hunter or a big folding case knife was the gift a boy received when he was finally judged old enough to hunt often for around $5, often with his initials scratched into the sheath. The blades took a fine edge and held it. The handles glowed amber with age, and the dating system stamped on each tang let a man know the very year his knife was born. Oral histories from across the country recall the ritual of the case knife, the way a father would hand one over before a boy's first season, the way it would then ride on that boy's belt for 50 years. Case wasn't just a knife, it was an heirloom in the making, a thing built to be inherited. Yet as the great American cutlery houses struggled against imports and changing tastes, the everyday case hunter slipped from the role it once held. The company endures, but the universal deer camp case, the one in every truck and on every belt, has largely passed into memory. Today, those old double X stamped blades are cherished by families who still remember whose hands first carried them. Number 5. The Buck 110. Folding Hunter changed the American knife forever and then quietly slipped from its throne. Introduced in 1964 by the Buck family of California, the 110 was a heavy lockback folder with a clip point blade, brass bolsters, and rich ebony or walnut handles, and it gave a hunter the strength of a fixed blade and something that folded safely into a belt pouch. At around $10, it was an instant sensation, and by the late 1960s, nearly every serious hunter in the country wanted one riding on his hip in that snap-flap leather sheath. The lock was strong enough to trust on a heavy job, the blade was wide enough to dress any deer, and the whole knife had a heft and a balance that felt like quality the moment a man picked it up. Oral histories from the era recall the Buck 110 as a status symbol and a workhorse at once, the knife a young man saved for and then carried for decades. It was so successful that a buck knife became the way many Americans referred to any folding hunter at all. Yet as lightweight clip-it pocket knives and modern tactical folders took over the market, the heavy brass and wood 110 began to feel like a relic of another time. The company still makes it, but the days when it ruled every belt are gone. Today, the Buck 110 stands as the last great icon of the leather sheath era, the folding hunter that an entire generation of American men carried into the woods. Number 4. The Caw Bar came home from the war and never stopped working. Made by the Union Cutlery Company of Olean, New York, the Caw Bar earned its fame as the United States Marine Corps fighting and utility knife of the Second World War, a 7-inch clip-point blade with a stacked leather handle and a steel guard, built to do everything a Marine asked in the Pacific. The name itself was the stuff of legend, said to come from a trapper's letter thanking the company for a knife that helped him K a bar, kill a bear. When the boys came home in 1945, the Caw Bar came with them, and that battlefield blade went straight into the deer woods. Surplus military knives could be had cheap, and a generation of veterans dressed their venison with the same knife that had crossed Iwo Jima. The leather handle warmed in the hand, the blade held a working edge, and the knife carried a weight of memory no other blade could match. Oral histories from veterans recall the Caw Bar as the knife they trusted with their lives and then trusted with their suppers. Yet as the war generation aged and purpose-built sporting knives took over, the military blade slowly retired to the closet shelf. The Caw Bar endures as a legend, but the days when it was every hunter's companion have faded. Today it survives in footlockers and on den walls, a knife that won a war and then quietly went hunting. Number 3. The Randall Made knife was the handmade dream a hunter saved a year to own. Made one at a time in Orlando, Florida, by Bo Randall and his small shop of craftsmen beginning in the late 1930s, a Randall was forged from tool steel, hand ground, and fitted with stacked leather or stag, the kind of knife a man ordered and then waited months to receive. They were never cheap, costing many times what a hardware store blade did, but a Randall was a knife for life, balanced and beautiful and sharp beyond anything a factory could match. Soldiers carried them through the Second World War and Vietnam, and hunters who could afford one treated it like an heirloom from the moment it arrived in the mail. Oral histories recall the pride of unwrapping a Randall, the perfect grind, the flawless leather, the sense that a man held something made by human hands rather than machines. To own one was to belong to a quiet brotherhood of those who understood what a knife could be. Yet the very thing that made the Randall special, the slow, handmade craft, also kept it rare, and as mass-produced knives filled the market, the handmade hunting knife became something most men only read about. The Randall shop still works to this day, but the world that prized such patient craftsmanship has largely vanished. Today, a Randall remains the grail for many collectors, a reminder that the finest American hunting knife was never bought off a shelf at all. Number 2, the Bowie knife was the blade that gave the American hunting knife its swagger. Born in the legend of Jim Bowie, whose enormous knife won the bloody sandbar fight of 1827 and went with him to die at the Alamo in 1836, the Bowie became the defining American big knife, a long clip point blade with a guard, equally suited to a duel, a hunt, or a hard day on the frontier. For decades, it was the knife every man on the edge of civilization wanted on his hip, used to butcher game, clear brush, skin a bear, and settle arguments. Frontier blacksmiths and English cutlery firms alike turned them out by the thousands, and a good Bowie could cost anywhere from $1 to a small fortune depending on its maker. Oral histories and frontier accounts recall the Bowie as a knife of fearsome reputation, the blade that defined American manhood for a generation. It was too much knife for a squirrel and just enough for a grizzly, and it carried a romance no folding hunter ever could. Yet as the frontier closed and lighter, purpose-built hunting knives took over, the great Bowie retreated into legend, more a thing of stories than of deer camps. Today it survives in museums, in reenactments, and in the imagination of every boy who ever dreamed of the wild country. The Bowie was the knife that taught America what a knife could mean, and its shadow falls across every blade on this list. Number 1, and finally, in first place, the Marble's Ideal stands as the knife that invented the American hunting knife as we know it. Designed by Webster Marble of Gladstone, Michigan, and introduced just before the turn of the 20th century, the Ideal was the first blade built from the ground up purely for the hunter. A deep-bellied clip point with a finger guard, a stacked leather handle, and a balance that made skinning and field dressing almost effortless. Before the Ideal, men hunted with butcher knives, trade knives, and converted kitchen blades. After it, every American hunting knife that followed, the Western, the Case, the Buck, the Sharpfinger, owed something to its shape. In the early 1900s, an Ideal sold for a few dollars through the great mail-order catalogs, and it set the standard that the whole industry would chase for the next 100 years. Oral histories from the golden age of American hunting recall the Marble's Ideal as the knife of the serious sportsman, the blade a guide trusted and a gentleman hunter prized. The deep belly skinned, the fine point detailed, and the leather handle warmed in the hand on the coldest November dawn. Marbles built them to last lifetimes, and many have. Yet as the old Michigan works changed hands and cheaper knives crowded the market, the Ideal that started it all slipped quietly from the shelves. Today, an original Marble's Ideal is the crown jewel of any collection, the founding father of every blade an American man ever carried into the woods. From the humble old Hickory in the kitchen drawer to the legendary Marble's Ideal that started it all, these 15 forgotten knives tell the story of how American men met the woods, one honest blade at a time. They were cheap and they were precious, made of plain carbon steel and built to be handed down, and nearly everyone has slipped from the shelves where it once ruled. If your grandfather carried one of these into the woods, leave its name in the comments. Some of us are still out there keeping the old steel sharp.